My husband told me he was leaving me right after I cleared his family's $120,000 debt. His mom smirked and said, "We never liked you anyway." But they had no idea what I was planning next. I 34F, never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to get this off my chest because what happened next still feels surreal. 2 months ago, I made the biggest financial decision of my life. My husband's family had been drowning in debt for years. Medical bills from his father's cancer treatment, his brother's failed business venture, and his mother's shopping addiction had piled up to exactly $120,000. They'd been making minimum payments and getting nowhere, with interest eating them alive. My husband came to me with tears in his eyes, explaining how his family was about to lose their house. He'd never asked me for anything major before, and seeing him so broken destroyed me. I'd inherited money from my grandmother's estate the year before, and after some serious soul-searching, I decided to help. Against my better judgment and despite my financial advisor's warnings, I liquidated almost everything to clear their debt completely. The relief on his face when I handed over the check made every penny feel worth it. His family threw a celebration dinner, thanking me repeatedly. His mother even hugged me, something she'd never done in our 5 years of marriage. For 2 weeks, I felt like I'd finally been accepted into their tight-knit family. Then everything changed. Last Monday evening, my husband walked into our kitchen while I was preparing dinner. His demeanor was different, cold and distant. He told me he wanted a divorce. Just like that. No explanation, no discussion, no attempt at counseling. He said he'd been thinking about it for months and had finally made up his mind. I stood there holding a wooden spoon, sauce dripping onto the floor, unable to process what I was hearing. When I asked him why, he shrugged and said we'd grown apart. When I mentioned the money I'd just given his family, he had the audacity to tell me that was my choice and had nothing to do with our marriage. The next day, I went to his mother's house hoping to find some answers. Maybe she could talk sense into him, or at least help me understand what had triggered this sudden decision. Instead, I found her sitting in her newly renovated kitchen, renovations that my money had made possible after clearing their debt. When I explained what her son had told me, she didn't even pretend to be surprised. She looked me straight in the eye and said they'd never really liked me anyway. She told me I was too controlling, too opinionated, and that her son deserved someone who would make him happier. The smirk on her face while she said this will haunt me forever. That's when everything clicked. They'd used me. The timing wasn't coincidental. They'd waited exactly long enough after receiving the money to make their move. I'd been played by people I'd trusted, people I'd sacrificed my financial security for. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. But somewhere between their house and mine, the shock transformed into something else entirely. They thought they'd won, thought they'd gotten away with the perfect con. They had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to my breaking point. Update 1. I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could about debt forgiveness, gift taxes, and legal recourse. What I discovered was both disappointing and enlightening. The money I'd given them was legally considered a gift, which meant I had no direct way to get it back. But that didn't mean I was powerless. I started documenting everything. Every text message, every email, every conversation I could remember about the debt and the timing of the divorce announcement. I also began investigating their financial situation more thoroughly, something I should have done before writing that check. What I found was infuriating. His brother's failed business hadn't actually failed. He'd been hiding assets and had recently purchased a new truck. His mother's shopping addiction was worse than I'd known, and she'd already started accumulating new debt despite just being cleared of the old. Most importantly, I discovered that my husband had been planning this divorce for months, based on browser history I found on our shared computer. But the real breakthrough came when I remembered something crucial. When I'd written the check to clear their debts, I'd insisted on paying the creditors directly rather than giving them cash. This meant I had detailed records of exactly which debts were paid and when. More importantly, it meant I could contact those creditors. Update 2. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in fraud cases. While she confirmed that getting the money back would be nearly impossible, she was fascinated by the timeline and the evidence I'd gathered. She suggested that what had happened might constitute fraud by deception, especially given the premeditated nature of the divorce request. But legal action would be expensive and uncertain. Instead, she helped me understand exactly what rights I had regarding the debts I'd paid. Since I'd paid the creditors directly, I had documentation proving that I was the one who'd satisfied those debts. This gave me some interesting options. I also discovered something my husband's family didn't know. When you pay off someone else's debt, especially large amounts, there are tax implications. The IRS considers debt forgiveness over certain amounts as taxable income to the recipient. My husband's family was about to get a very unpleasant surprise come tax season. But I wasn't content to wait for the IRS to catch up with them. I wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions more immediately. I started by contacting my husband's employer. I didn't say anything defamatory, but I did mention that he was going through a divorce and might be experiencing some personal financial stress. In his line of work, financial consulting, personal financial problems can raise red flags about trustworthiness with client money. Then I reached out to his brother's business partners. Again, I was careful to stick to facts. I simply informed them that the brother had recently received a large financial gift that had allowed him to clear significant personal debts, and that they might want to verify that business finances and personal finances weren't being mixed inappropriately. Update 3. The dominoes started falling faster than I'd expected. My husband's employer began asking questions about his personal finances, which led to a review of his client accounts. While they didn't find any wrongdoing, the scrutiny made his work environment extremely uncomfortable. His brother's business partners were less understanding. They'd been unaware of his debt situation and were concerned about the implications for their partnership. The new truck purchase, combined with the revelation about hidden financial problems, led to some very difficult conversations about transparency and trust. But the real satisfaction came from his mother. The tax implications of the debt forgiveness hit her first, since the largest portion of the debt had been in her name. When she received notice that she owed taxes on $120,000 of income, she panicked. She called my husband frantically, demanding to know how this was possible. That's when they realized they'd never actually asked me about the tax implications of my gift. They'd assumed I'd handle everything, just like I'd handled the debt payments. Instead, they were now facing a tax bill they couldn't afford, with no assets to pay it since they'd already spent or hidden everything they had. My husband tried calling me, probably hoping I'd help them with this new problem just like I'd helped with the original debt. I let it go to voicemail. His message was desperate, explaining that they hadn't known about the tax consequences and asking if we could work something out. I called him back the next day. I told him I'd be happy to help them understand their tax obligations, just like I'd helped clear their debts. I suggested they contact a tax attorney, which would probably cost them several $1,000s in consultation fees. I also mentioned that they might want to start setting aside money for the tax payment, since the IRS doesn't typically accept "we didn't know" as an excuse for non-payment. The conversation was brief. He tried to guilt me, saying his family was struggling and that I was being vindictive. I reminded him that I'd already given his family $120,000 and that any additional financial problems they were experiencing were consequences of their own choices and lack of planning. Final update. It's been 6 weeks since that last conversation, and the divorce is proceeding. I've moved out of our shared home and into a smaller apartment, but I'm surprisingly at peace with the change. The financial hit was significant, but I'm young enough to recover, and I've learned valuable lessons about trust and due diligence. My husband's family is struggling with their new reality. The tax bill is real and substantial, and they're discovering that the financial relief I provided was temporary if they didn't change their underlying spending habits. His mother has already accumulated new debt, his brother's business partnership is strained, and my husband is looking for a new job after the workplace scrutiny became unbearable. They thought they could use me and discard me without consequences. They believed that once they had my money, I'd be powerless to respond. What they didn't understand is that money isn't just about the cash. It's about the paper trail, the legal implications, and the ripple effects that follow every financial transaction. I didn't get my $120,000 back, but I got something more valuable: the knowledge that actions have consequences, even when people think they've covered their tracks. They wanted to play games with someone's generosity and trust. They just picked the wrong person to play with. The smirk on his mother's face when she told me they'd never liked me has been replaced by panic as she tries to figure out how to pay taxes on money that's already spent. My husband's confident declaration that he was leaving me has turned into desperate job searching and financial stress. I'm not proud of being vindictive, but I'm not ashamed of ensuring that people face the natural consequences of their choices. They made their bed with lies and manipulation. Now they get to sleep in it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's simply making sure that people can't escape the reality of what they've done. They thought they'd gotten away with the perfect con, but they forgot that every financial transaction leaves traces, and every action has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. I'm moving forward with my life, wiser and more cautious, but not bitter. They'll be dealing with the aftermath of their choices for years to come. And that feels like justice enough.